everyone, and welcome to the Adventures in Brain Injury podcast. My name is Kevin Ballister. I'm a severe traumatic brain injury survivor. I'm creator of adventuresinbraininjury.com, creator of feedabrain.com, and author of How to Feed a Brain, Nutrition for Optimal Brain Function and Repair. With me, as always, is my magnificent true survivor and co-host, Michelle Mamberg. Hello, Michelle. How are you?
Hello, Kevin, and thank you for such a warm and exciting, dramatic introduction.
Yes. So this episode is brought to you by Revive Treatment Centers of America, located in Denver, Colorado, an excellent neurorehabilitation center that focuses on stroke, on brain injury, on neurorehabilitation, and all sorts of neurological conditions.
And
Go ahead.
A brain.
And How to Feed a Brain. Yeah, actually, they put a copy of How to Feed a Brain in their intake package as well.
Absolutely, they should. Yeah, absolutely necessary.
And Dr. Dan Engel's book, The Concussion Repair Manual. Yes.
Brilliant. Absolutely essential reading.
It's great. It's great. Mm-hmm. Yep. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. Super appreciated. And if you would like to throw us a little tip for each episode, you can do so at patreon.com/AIBI for Adventures in Brain Injury.
And we thank you for your support in getting the word out around the world.
Seriously, the reviews really help us reach a larger audience, and the support helps us to do this more often.
Thank you so much. And today we have, thanks to that support, a tremendous influence in your life, fabulous woman, and terrific podcast guest.
Yeah, my speech language pathologist, Miss Catherine Hayes. So tell me about Catherine.
Well, my pleasure. Beginning in a scientific study field titled Communication Disorders, Ms. Catherine Hayes has become an influential speech-language pathologist in practice for over 30 years. She specializes in rehabilitation following neurological insult. Her vast experience spans myriad ages and levels of severity in acute hospital wards, nursing facilities, specialized TBI rehabilitation centers, and her own private practice. She has a special interest in the Parkinson's disease population and ran a support group in Wimberley, Texas for 12 years. Ms. Hayes is a true believer in the phenomenal power rehabilitation expertise has on developing neuroplasticity of the brain. She is currently a clinical lecturer in the Communication Disorders graduate program at Texas State University, and guiding the administrative direction of the program, she serves as the Director of Clinical Services. As a passionate instructor, she inspires her students to pursue their own professional competency within the shared love for the field of speech-language pathology. Welcome, Ms. Catherine Hayes, to the Adventures in Brain Injury.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
It's so exciting to have you here. I love that. And so Catherine is my speech language pathologist for much of my recovery. And it's fantastic to have her on here. Because and you can actually listen to this if you listen to the early episodes of the Adventures in Brain Injury podcast. I'm speaking a lot slower and less put together, having more trouble organizing my thoughts. And I'm just super appreciative of you, Catherine.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure with you.
And he's such a keener, isn't he, Catherine? I mean, he would be teaching me about what he has to do and what he's practicing. And I could always tell when he was up visiting me in Canada, Kevin, you're tired, aren't you? Hadn't had a drink, but he sure sounded like he had.
Well, that can happen with dysarthric speech like his. Yeah.
Exactly. So I wanted to note that Texas, me being in Canada, Texas has been very fortunate to have you developing your skills and extensive experience within the adult neurological disorders, cognitive rehab, and dysphagia, which is the medical term used to describe difficulty with swallowing. And Kevin had difficulty with swallowing. So how did your studies begin, your interest, and how did you find your passion within this field? Tell us your story.
Well, when I was in graduate school, at the beginning, I wasn't sure what population I wanted to work with, if it would be children or adults. And then I was fortunate enough to get my off-campus placement at the VA hospital. And at the VA hospital, I worked with a huge number of patients with traumatic brain injury, and it was extremely interesting to me. I had two mentors that I worked under who were fabulous and encouraged me to go that route. So when I graduated, I was able to be hired at a rehabilitation hospital. And soon after I got there, they were just developing their brain injury program, and I was asked to be the speech pathology representative and primary clinician. And so I fell into that role and loved it, learned everything I could, worked with the psychologist and all the other therapists to learn everything I could possibly learn about it. And that just became a huge passion of mine. So I went from there to a brain injury specific hospital, and at one point worked at Children's Hospital with just children with brain injuries, and then just in different settings, but that's how it started.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. And I really love that you came in with speech and got into neurology. And we're talking speech language. And, you know, what I often talk about, speak to my clients about and others is the influence of language on neurology. The immense influence of language on neurology. Could you expand a little bit on what that means to you?
I think they're so intertwined, it would be hard to separate them out, quite honestly. Mm-hmm. I call it cognitive linguistic therapy when I am working on cognition, because the language is the base for all your cognitive functions, in my opinion, and the way that I look at it.
I like that. Cognitive linguistic therapy.
Yes.
Yes. And did you say because you feel like language is one of the most important aspects of cognition?
I think it's the basis of it.
Or the basis, yeah. Yeah.
You have to think with language. And, you know, they're just so intertwined that to me, those two go together perfectly, and they're necessary for each other.
I'm curious, when a professional is working with pre-language brain injury, how does that treatment unfold? When language is not yet established to the point where you could speak to Kevin about exactly what you want and he has a depth of experience for those words, how do you do the pre-verbal population?
There are a lot of ways that we get at that. We work even at the comatose level, working on coma stimulation with specific kinds of stimuli to help stimulate responses, stimulate attention, stimulate language, and stimulate speech. So starting from that, but if I am working with a person who is no longer in a coma, is emerging and going through the different stages of brain injury recovery and is not yet speaking, we can check language in a number of other ways by having them follow directions to see if they understand language, by using the written language to, check if they're able to express themselves, even if they can't yet speak. And then we stimulate if they're able to speak but are having trouble, say, thinking of words or organizing their thoughts. We have therapy to assist with that, lots of compensations, kinds of, technology has come a long way in assisting with that.
Yes.
But yes, a lot of TBI clients cannot necessarily speak in the beginning, but also, are assessing, well, maybe they can't speak verbally, but what kind of language skills do they have for comprehension and understanding, and also the ability to express what they're trying to say?
I love that. So it's not necessary to speak to communicate. And what I wrote in my blog even several years ago was that I was so lucky to be able to communicate in some form. Because even though it was hard for me to communicate, I work with clients who are unable to communicate, and I know how frustrating that can be when you're not able to say your needs or wants or anything, and people are making assumptions about your thoughts and feelings always. And it's so important. So when you were talking about coma stimulation, stimulating people to begin verbalizing or communicating in some sort of way, could you talk about some practices that you might use?
Well, a lot of times in coma stimulation, it's a very specific amount of stimulation and time of stimulation where you don't overstimulate or understimulate. It depends on the level they are and how they are progressing or coming out of it. A lot of times in the rehab hospitals, we had the different therapists coming in at specific times with specific intervals and doing particular kinds of stim. But some of them that we would do for language would include music that the person loved, that, or saying words that were meaningful and relevant to them. Even bringing in family members so they could hear their voices specifically. I did other things like using, we would write on their hands and their skin so they could feel that and feel the letters. So there are a lot of ways of getting to that. But a lot of the coma stim is just trying to get attention or get them to recognize and respond. So much of it was also giving a simple direction or, giving a direction combined with some tactile or, different, example, cold or wet or things like that, and trying to get a response. So we would first look for any kind of response and then a specific response as they started to emerge from the coma. And then, then working more specifically on guiding the language and speech.
Catherine, how would you assess whether or not a client or patient is overstimulated by that type of work in a comatose state?
A lot of times when the overstimulation happened in coma, there was absolutely no response.
Okay.
Or they might become very agitated. So it kind of depended on the person. It was kind of a trial and error a little bit. And of course, we used the nurses and the doctors to assist us with their technology in guiding us on what was, going on if they were becoming overstimulated, looking at heart rate and things like that.
Sure. Okay, so those are similar. When Kevin and I go into functional neurology assessments, well, I can speak many times to the overstimulation of my brain under very simple, unassuming exercises and a resulting crash. Months, hours, months, and it's devastating. So being unable to speak what's going on, you would need a team of very attentive practitioners knowing which physiological signs to assess. Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah, we talk about metabolic tolerance.
Exactly.
And staying within that sweet spot so that we're actually improving the situation less instead of crashing and burning. It's like you work past the envelope, pushing the envelope. I think Alec and I talked about that years ago on the podcast, but pushing the envelope. And then when you go too far, it's like, that's no longer therapeutic. That's the opposite. You
right.
Screwed it up. Go back. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. All that.
No, that's straight to bed.
Straight to bed. Go directly to bed.
Go to bed, yeah.
And can I jump in and just say, I think that this is where a lot of families need education, because sometimes, out of the goodness of their hearts, they want to come in and have everybody visiting and talking and the television on and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it results in just overstimulated client or patient. So we would, do a lot of training with the families on that.
Yes, and we thank you for bringing awareness to that, because some people, for example, let me just get a little personal here. For me, going to the bathroom was incredibly overstimulating. I could not hear the tinkle of my golden water hitting the toilet bowl. Running a bath was absolutely just devastating. Having a shower where the water was falling on my head, even in the gentlest little shower head trickle. It was just, those simple things were so overwhelming for my brain coming out of acute PANDAS stages. It was, people couldn't believe it. People couldn't believe that I was unable to ride in a car because the sound of the tires on the pavement was distressing to me. So people don't understand that having a meal with utensils on plates, having people coming in and out, background noise, television, bright lights, blue lights from screens, it's too much.
Yep, that's right.
Overstimulation, absolutely. So, all right, moving out of a coma, when we have brain injury or brain disease or brain irregularity or an oxygen, whatever, brain stuff going on, and having trouble speaking and communicating, you work with clients or patients to help them to find a means to communicate with what they have.
Yes.
Could you tell me about what you might do with the clients who are unable to speak, and maybe some experiences you've had?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of it is first evaluating how can they communicate? What is there some way that they can communicate? So, we will go, we'll look for gestures, written language, anything that we can do if it becomes like a yes, no board, eye glance, whatever we need to do to get the person to communicate and be able to initially at least tell us their needs and wants so that we can at least get them what they need, or if they're uncomfortable, help them out. And a large part of that is establishing what their level of understanding is and their ability to express, and then establishing some way to make that happen for that person. Then training staff, families, in how to communicate with the person. There have been a lot of cases that have stuck with me over time. One was a young man who had had a TBI from being punched in the head, and his comprehension was pretty good, and he could express himself a little bit with writing, but there was no verbal speech coming out at all. And the family was very upset about that, but we were working on it, of course, in every way possible. But one day we were in therapy and I looked at him and I said, "Did you know that you can speak? You can speak. You haven't spoken in a long time, but you can speak. So I want you to read these things out loud." And just like that, he started talking.
Oh, wow.
No kidding.
And
Why?
later he said, I didn't think I could, and I just didn't try. And I had done everything I thought I should do. And one day I just said, "You can speak," because there's a reason that he shouldn't, based on what I had seen. So that was a big moment. And it helped me to understand as a therapist a little bit more too. So
that's amazing. That makes me think of that. It's learned helplessness, I think is what it's called. But it's like they did an experiment where basically they took a calf and tied it to a pole and, would give it like food and water and all of that. But it was limited by a radius because it was tied to this pole, right?
Yeah.
And then they let it off the leash, right? But it's still, because it's been on that pole for so long, for years, like after it had grown up, they then released it from the pole and it would stay in that radius. Same thing with like circus elephants. They put the weights on the calves of the elephants when they're babies, and so they can't move. And so then when they put them on a huge elephant, it's like, oh, I can't move now. And it's kind of that, like, there's actually a story of how, I'm sorry to get graphic, but like there was a circus tent fire, and these elephants that totally could have like ran didn't, because they had these cuffs on their calves that were like flimsy and nothing, but it was psychological. It's amazing.
Right.
So that's so cool that you can just release that learned, I can't story. And that story in itself is what is holding people back.
Brilliant.
Right. And I think because we were always using the written modality, I think he maybe thought he couldn't, but we were able to move forward from that. That was just something that stuck in my mind. It was a great moment. So.
Wow.
Well, and Catherine, I can just envision what it's like for you to witness and facilitate such great leaps. I mean, a family that is in distress over the fact that their loved one cannot speak, and then this man looking at you helplessly through eyes that, well, but I can't. And then you finding the way to open the door just by an invitation and encouragement and love and support, and suddenly speech comes forth. I can just imagine the joy that must fill you and the room and those around the patient.
Absolutely. I have always felt very blessed to have found this field and have loved what I do every single day. And it's moments like that make it's just all worth it.
I used to travel a half hour to see Catherine, even though there was many places near me, and I was like, nope, I'm going to see Catherine. Because she does. She loves what she does. She's excellent at what she does. And I appreciate you, Catherine Hayes. So I want to talk about the other side of speech language pathology, and that is swallowing.
Okay.
You guys held the case, like when I was recovering and I was being fed through a gastric feed. It was because the SLP, the speech language pathologist, said that I couldn't eat because I would aspirate. When I swallowed, it would go into my lungs. And not only that, it would be a silent aspiration, which means I would aspirate like fluid or whatever, food, foreign material would end up in my lungs, and I wouldn't even cough.
Oh, right.
And so that's pretty dangerous. That's how you get pneumonia and MRSA and all sorts of nasty infections. So that wasn't good. And the person who held the keys as to whether I could eat again was people like you, Catherine. You people. So I have a love-hate relationship with you.
So speak to that, Catherine. How do you
Well, what I wanted to bring up was, first of all, the gastric feeds are, they're basically fortified corn syrup or fortified sugar. And I'm working on changing that little reality because it's horrific that we're feeding people we're trying to get well. Corn syrup, soy protein isolate, corn maltodextrin, calcium caseinate, canola oil, as 5 times a day. That's like the standard feeds for people in a hospital setting. And that's just upsetting. And so I'm working on changing that reality. And also, as far as speech language pathologists go and making that call, I feel like, there was a time when I worked with a ENT, I believe, in emergency medicine, who did a swallow test with me and was like, yeah, you seem pretty good. I'm going on a trip for the time being, but I would approve you for small bites. What was it? Pleasure, to eat, because eating is so important. When you haven't eaten anything conventionally in months, or at least when I hadn't, primal instincts totally overrode rationality. And it was like somebody came in and said, you'll never walk again, but you can have this amazing meal right now. I probably would have taken it. So yeah, making that call, there was also a speech language pathologist who came and visited me from visiting nurse service. And she was like, no, you can't, and wouldn't let me, even though the other one, the lady did. And it was very upsetting and long ordeal of like, I just want to eat some food. And she said I couldn't. Like, so I guess what it was like, there's a lot of nervousness that happens in the profession, I think, because it can be very dangerous, if you allow a patient to eat orally when they're not ready, that can be dangerous. But also there's another side to that, which is overly cautious. So can you speak into what criteria you need to see, and how do you know when it's time to allow somebody to start eating?
So, the first thing that, we always want to look at is how alert is the person. If a person is not alert, we typically don't even move forward with it at all because there's such a high risk of problems.
Mm-hmm.
The person becomes alert. We do what's called a bedside swallow evaluation, where we assess the muscle and nerve function of the swallowing system. We do trials of different liquids, different thicknesses of liquids, different puree textures and solids, but small amounts, and see what we can tell bedside. But typically we try to get an instrumental assessment that is objective to help us really make a good decision about whether the person can safely begin some trial of food or start eating. So one of those is a modified barium swallow study, where the person takes trials of different liquids and solids that are coated with barium. And
which is a radioactive isotope.
Yes, that's right.
Seen with neuroimaging, basically, so that they can watch what's happening with the bolus of food or puree or whatever it is.
That's right. And so we can see how it's moving all the way from the lips down through the throat into the esophagus, and even a little further down to see if we have other issues like reflux with the stuff gut that could also aspirate. So there are a lot of things that we get out of an instrumental assessment like that. And that helps a lot in knowing within the modified barium swallow study. Sometimes we do trial compensations to see if they will be effective in helping a person swallow safely. My main goal in a study like that is to find some way that they can eat some texture safely so we can begin working on recovering the swallow.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I guess over time, I started out extremely cautious, and then over time, within, the range of safety, became less cautious, more aggressive, and being a way to help that person start to eat.
I appreciate that. And I guess it's comfortability. Like, when you first are doing anything, when you first start playing piano for something, you're going to hit wrong keys, right? Mm-hmm. When you get good at it, like, you're no longer worried about hitting wrong keys all the time.
Right.
So, yeah. So it boils down sometimes to experience and comfortability with where you are with things. But yeah, right. I really appreciate, finding some way that they can move forward, because the goal is to get them healthy, back to normal. And healthy in today's world is not consuming corn syrup and soy protein, which is what is being fed to patients that are unable to eat conventionally,
right.
typically, right?
Well,
Right.
and I think, Kevin, just going back to your previous conversation and Catherine's example, it's uplifting to think that we can do this. We can be told, you will eat again. It's so important to be able to share real food with people.
Right.
Eating out of a can just is so uninspiring.
It is.
And I remember your stories, Kevin, of you first learning how to eat, and steak.
Well, and if you
chew.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you remember in my book, I talk about how having people able to eat the same meal together, even if it's pureed for one person, like I actually talk about making gastric feeds, making your own gastric feeds in my book, and making them according to the feed-to-brain style of eating, where you're incorporating all of the nutrients for optimal brain function and repair in that puree or liquid diet, right? And when you can sit down with the family and it kind of normalizes things, even when it's not really that normal, like in the grand scheme of things, like you're still having food injected into your belly or whatever it might be. But it's like with your family and you're eating the same meal, and you're actually getting the same nutrients. The way we have typically ancestrally ate together is we eat the same thing as a community together. And I really love the idea of normalizing eating again.
It's so important, yes.
I think eating is, like you said, it's such a part of everything we do. And people want to get back to eating. And I think we just have to use all our resources and all our evidence-based knowledge and do everything we can do to help that person get back. So
it's almost like food is a social lubricant.
Oh, yeah. Nice choice of words.
There you go.
But yes, I concur.
So, a lot of times when a person is starting to eat again, they're restricted to sometimes a consistency like a puree or a liquid, things like that, for safety, just because of the risk of aspiration. But, I find the more that you can make that food appealing as well, the better. I really liked one rehab hospital that I worked at briefly. Their style for the people who were on pureed was that they also went through the cafeteria line, picked out the food that they wanted in its whole form. Then they took it to the back and pureed it, put it on a bowl, and then gave it to them. So they knew exactly what they were actually eating. They had chosen it. It was spaced and tasted good. This is a place that I worked where they basically sent out a tray that was unidentifiable. And unappealing. So I think there's a lot to, making it appealing and making it as normal as possible, like you said.
Yes, yes. Well, even pureed Caesar salad still tastes like Caesar salad.
It all ends up that way in your belly anyways.
It should.
At least it should. If you chew effectively, that is. There is something I want to piggyback on this, and that has to do with enzymes with gastric feeding, because we're skipping the first phase of digestion, which is when we chew our food, right? And so when we chew our food in the first phase of digestion, which I believe is called mastication, where we chew, we release enzymes in our saliva, and those enzymes partially break down our food before it goes into our stomach. And are enzymes typically used in a hospital setting when a client or patient is unable to eat conventionally?
I have never seen that. No.
Right, I haven't either.
That's a really good point, Kevin.
Yeah. I'm looking into all this stuff.
That is a very interesting, good point. I completely agree. Yes.
Right.
And even for people who are capable of eating normally, who in my experience are fast eaters, if I tell my clients who are fast talkers tend to be fast eaters, and I suggest that they take digestive enzymes to help relieve the stress on their stomach because they're clearly not chewing their food.
Well, I haven't showed you this yet, Michelle, but my
What?
next supplement,
Yes.
it's a digestive enzyme. It's called gut brain. You're going to love it.
That's wonderful. Wow.
Yes. And it's necessary, Kevin. It really, really is
It
necessary.
really is so important.
Yeah. What else do we have with Ms. Catherine? What else may we ask her? I want to ask her about the slow and slurred speech, Kevin.
Sure. Yeah, I had what you were talking about. People think I'm drunk sometimes.
I know, and I think it's
I have
fascinating.
hilarious stories about that. That could be like stories where I'm like, you people, I have a brain injury, and get all mad and be like, you don't understand, and yada yada. Or I can be like, yeah, I get it. You think I'm drunk? I know. I kind of sound drunk. I like what? Am I supposed to, like, when you see somebody who slurs their words, stumbles a bit because they have cerebellar damage, and who naturally has this positive and happy disposition, which I currently do. People are just like, yeah, you instantly think, what is the most likely situation? I bet you that person fell and had a severe traumatic brain injury and lived against all odds and is recovered to the point where that's the only main artifact of his brain injury. That's the most common possibility, right?
Yeah,
no, obviously. Right. Obviously, they're gonna be like, yeah, that dude's drunk. That dude's drunk or stoned or something. So so I definitely have that experience, and I know many of our listeners also experience something similar.
And so how's that improved, Catherine?
Well, and what Kevin is describing, we call dysarthria. It is, it's a disorder of articulation and the motor and muscular control of speech. So, you have a lot of things that feed into that. Weakness of the articulators, but also sometimes poor breath control and diaphragm control. So the air isn't fueling the vocal cords to produce sound. The voice can be very weak, and then the sounds that need air are not articulated clearly. So you've got a number of things going on that affect, the way the speech intelligibility is. And so when you've got this, you have to work, I tell the people that I work with that basically all of the muscles are moving more slowly or in a less coordinated way than they did before. So it's our job to strengthen them and increase the speed and coordination of the musculature. And there are a lot of ways to do that. Strengthening is a big one. We have different ways to do that. And then also getting, the person to have feedback and, looking at themselves and practicing and listening to themselves is a huge part of it, I think, too. Sometimes there are anatomical changes from the injury. I've worked with people that had severe jaw changes where they can't open their mouth very far, which will affect the speech production. And so we work on systems that open and close the mouth.
Oh, wow.
So, we work on that. We analyze and evaluate what musculature is weak, what the air support system is like, what the vocal system is like, and then the prosody, the intonation, and then, of course, this specific articulation. And on each of those areas and then putting them together so that the end product is at least intelligible. And what we're shooting for is pleasant and effective, good sounding speech.
Can I tell you what my original meter was to know if I was speaking intelligibly?
Yeah, what was that?
Siri. If Siri understood me, I was like, all right. Siri knows what I'm saying. Cool.
That's right.
We're having a conversation.
Yeah, I've used Siri a lot in therapy, actually.
Really?
Oh,
Yes.
Really? Ooh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Because Siri is objective, right?
Right.
And so I'll say, okay, I want you to count or whatever. And then we see what Siri prints out or how Siri responds.
Ah.
And then we can, then there's a lot of that feedback. You're right, Kevin, that's excellent. And Siri, the technology that we have today, there are a lot of creative ways to work on your speech and to check your intelligibility. And fortunately for us, the technology has come a long, long way because voice recognition used to be extremely poor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking like 15 years ago or 20 years ago, it was extremely difficult. And I think Siri does a pretty good job.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how far we've come with it. And I wrote an article about technology and rehabilitation and neurology in general. And I think there's so much we can do, and there's several different kinds of technology, adaptive, and then things to make things harder. And they're all therapeutic tools we can use. And I love this, this age we live in and all these tools we have. And we still get to get creative with how we use them to improve what's between our ears, because that's the coolest technology of all. That's my 2 cents. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. I'm really excited to be presenting for, what did you ask me to present for? Where am I going this March?
You're presenting for my cognitive graduate students who are in a cognate called Neuro, Voice, and Swallowing. They are the students who hope to work in the hospitals and with this adult population. So it's that specific group that has been allowed in this cognate that you'll be presenting to.
These are your graduate students. This is the future of SLP. These are those who are going on. I love presenting to students. It's amazing. Thank you so much for that opportunity.
When is it? When is this?
This is March 11th.
Where?
At Texas State University in Round Rock, Texas. And they are really looking forward to Kevin coming to speak to them.
Okay, so it is a closed event, so I'm not invited.
You are invited. Absolutely invited. Absolutely. If you would like to come, you are invited.
Thank you both.
Hop on a plane, Michelle. Well, Catherine, I appreciate you so much, as I said earlier.
Yes.
And thank you for taking the time to talk with us about all this stuff and all these tools that can be used. And I mean, working with clients myself, working with people who have loved ones in a coma or out of a coma through recovery, relearning how to walk, talk, eat, swallow, all of that. It's really great to have you around as a resource, and just thank you so much for everything.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say how much I appreciate the work that you're doing that is going to help so many people with, getting their, brains more functional with the nutritional aspects of it. And I think that's fantastic.
Nutrition and beyond.
That's
I promise you there is more to it than just nutrition.
That's
Nutrition
right.
provides the building blocks, but what are we going to do with those building blocks? That's...
Call Catherine.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. It was a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you for your time, Catherine. Very, very inspiring work.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Kevin, I can see why this woman was such an influence in your recovery.
Yep, it's clear, isn't it?
It is. I mean, she's gentle, she's so knowledgeable, and I can imagine the effect she has on her students as well as her clients. It's so incredible to have an encouraging, loving support network as a person recovers from such a traumatic adventure.
I love it. Adventure. That's exactly right. A traumatic adventure.
Yes. Well, we do have to put our mindset toward reframing. It's not tragic. We're not victims. We're on a journey.
It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a thing.
No, it's it's a thing. It's what happened.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And to that end, with what happened, we are on this journey, your journey recovery, my journey recovery, and we're inviting others to join us, and whether they are on their own journey, to give us a little support, as we mentioned, with Patreon.
Patreon.com/AIBI for Ventures in Brain Injury.
And you can drop a buck or two in there or sponsor us for each episode. Tremendously helpful as we get the word out and get these modalities, healing modalities, out to a wider audience, which is global. And iTunes. People can hear us on iTunes. Make a download. Kevin, how so?
Yeah, you can hear us on iTunes. Additionally, you can leave us a review, which really helps us to reach more people. So go to iTunes and you can go to feedabrain.com/iTunes to go straight to the iTunes link and then open it up. You got to jump through some hoops to like do a review, but if you do so appreciated.
And I think you were offering thanks to people who were doing that.
Yeah.
Log on,
and we will bring you up on here. And if you reach out on the next episode where we announce your review, you can get a free copy of How to Feed a Brain, Nutrition for Optimal Brain Function and Repair.
And that serves all brains, not simply recovering brains.
Straight up. For optimal brain function.
That's right.
Yep.
And as of our recording date, the end of February 2019, let's let our audience know that in 59 days, you will be presenting at Paleo FX in Austin, Texas, April 26th through 28th.
Yeah, super excited about that. Keith and Michelle are family to me. I love them both dearly, and I'm really excited to be speaking of Paleo FX because Paleo FX changed my life. It changed the course of my recovery, and I'm really excited to present there. So if you're interested, go to feedabrain.com/PaleoFX. PALEOF as in Frank, X as in X-ray.
Perfect. And that family has grown exponentially. So clearly it is affecting so many lives. Great place to check out more information for feeding the brain.
Absolutely.
Someone take me to a doctor, just take away this curse.